This video is a continuation of the third chapter of 10th class history, that is, first phase of the Indian national movement. In this video, we are discussing the methods used by the early nationalists. The method popularly known as constitutional agitation method was followed by the early nationalists. They believed in the policy of constitutional agitation within the legal framework and slow, orderly political progress. The methods adopted by the early nationalists had two objectives. Now let us see the first set of methods. Their first objective was to educate people in India in modern politics, to arouse national political consciousness and to create a united public opinion. Because nationalism was a new thing for the Indians. We were not united. We were under different small kings and kingdoms. So we were standing divided. So first effort of the Indian nationalists were to unite Indians and to teach people of India the modern politics and to arouse a consciousness against the Britishers among the Indians. For this, they relied on the following methods. First, they held meetings where speeches were made and resolutions for popular demands were passed. Second, they made use of the press to criticize government policies. Third, they sent memorandums and petitions to government officials and the British Parliament. These petitions were carefully drafted with the facts and arguments. Though these petitions were addressed to the government, the real aim was to educate the Indian people, because the matters that has to be included in these memorandums were discussed among the Indians people. So slowly through this, they educated the Indians regarding the problems we are facing under the British. Now let us see the second set of methods. The second objective of the early nationalists was to influence the British government and the British public. To achieve these objectives, they followed the following methods. First, they made use of 3 P's, that is, petitions, prayers, and protests. They sent petitions, requests, and letters of protest to the British government to look into the problems of the Indians. Till then, the British Parliament and the Britishers, they knew things only from the officials. Now, these early nationalists began to send letters and petitions to the British Parliament. Second, a British committee of the Indian National Congress was set up in London in 1889, which published a weekly journal, India, to present India's case before the British public. Third, deputation of Indian leaders were sent to Britain. These political leaders carried on active propaganda in Britain. For example, Dadabhai Naoroji spent a major part of his life in Britain to create awareness among British people and politicians about the plight of Indians. Next, though the early nationalists could not influence masses a lot, they achieved a lot. Let us see the achievements of the early nationalists. The early nationalists represented the most progressive force of the time. They made the following contributions to the Indian national movement. First, the early nationalists created national awakening among people that they belonged to the one common country, India. This made Indians conscious of the bonds of common political, economic, and cultural interests that united them. Second, the early nationalists trained people in politics by popularizing the ideas of democracy, civil liberties, secularism, and nationalism. Third, the early nationalists did pioneering work by exposing the true nature of the British rule in India. They made people realize the economic content and character of British imperialism. By doing so, they weakened the foundation of the British rule in India. Fourth, their political and economic programs established the truth that India must be ruled in the interest of Indians. Fifth, the efforts of the early nationalists led to the following reforms: the appointment of Public Service Commission in 1886, a resolution of the House of Commons for simultaneous examination for the Indian ICS in London and India. Third, appointment of the Welby Commission on Indian Expenditure. Fourth, the Indian Council Act of 1892. These achievements of the early nationalists served as a base for the national movement in later years. Now, what are the failures of the early nationalists? The early nationalists have been criticized on the following grounds. The methods used by the early nationalists of passing resolutions and sending petitions were criticized as inadequate. They depended on the generosity of the British instead of relying on their own strength and challenging the imperialist might. Second, they failed to realize that the British and Indian interests clashed with each other. Britain was using India's resources to increase its wealth. Third, the early nationalists failed to draw the masses into the mainstream of the national movement. Their area of influence was limited to the urban educated Indians. In particular, their leadership was confined to professional groups such as lawyers, doctors, journalists, and teachers. And their methods were limited to petitions, prayers, and memorandums. The public had no role in these matters. So, early nationalists failed to draw the masses into the mainstream of national movement. Now, what was the British attitude towards the early nationalists? In the beginning, the British government looked upon the Congress movement with favor. In fact, a few government officials attended the first session of Congress and took part in deliberations. The Congress members were invited to a garden party by the Viceroy, Lord Dufferin, in Kolkata, and the Governor of Chennai. But the official attitude soon changed, because when A.O. started this party, Congress, the Britishers believed that they will be informed of the problems of Indians and they can manage it. Now soon they realized that this International Congress is going to be the main opponent challenging their stay in India. Lord Dufferin tried to divert the national movement by suggesting to Hume that the Congress should devote itself to social rather than political affairs. However, instead of being a tool in the hands of the authorities, the Congress gradually became the focus of Indian nationalism. In 1887, Lord Dufferin attacked the National Congress in his speech, ridiculed it as representing only a microscopic minority of the people. British officials criticized the National Congress and branded its leaders as disloyal babus and violent villains. In 1890, the government employees were forbidden from participating in the Congress deliberations or attending its meetings. Realizing that the growing unity of the Indians posed a major threat to their rule, the British pushed further the policy of divide and rule. They encouraged Syed Ahmad Khan, Raja Shiva Prasad of Benares, and other loyal Britishers individuals to start an anti-Congress movement. They sowed seeds of communalism between the Hindus and the Muslims on one hand, and between the Indian masses and their leaders on the other. They followed a policy of granting minor concessions to put down the growth of nationalism. However, their policy of repression and hostility made the Congress more powerful. Seeing the popularity of the Congress, they wanted to reduce the strength and influence of Congress by dividing Indians, by saying that Congress is a Hindu pro-party. Thus, they encouraged Syed Ahmad Khan to unite Muslims, later to form Muslim League against the Congress. So, hope you understood this session. Thank you.